They say a wedding day begins with joy, with laughter echoing through mirrors and soft music curling around the room. Mine began with silence, the kind that presses against your chest and reminds you to breathe carefully. I stood in front of the mirror in my bridal suite, wrapped in layers of white silk and lace, watching my reflection smile back at me. It was a beautiful smile. Practiced. Perfect. The kind people expect from a bride. But behind it lived a woman who had learned, over years, how to hide bruises that weren't always visible. This marriage wasn't rushed. I loved my husband deeply. He was kind, gentle, and hopeful in ways I admired. But love, I learned, doesn't erase warning signs, it only makes you forgive them faster. Especially when they come from his mother. My mother-in-law had never raised her voice at me. She didn't need to. Her power lived in glances, in pauses, in words spoken softly enough to deny later. From the first day she met me, she measured me like fabric she hadn't paid for. "She's pretty," she told my husband once, smiling at me, "but beauty fades. Obedience lasts." I laughed then, thinking it was a joke. I stopped laughing when the comments never did. The wedding morning was filled with flowers, makeup artists, and my friends buzzing around me. Yet, every time the door opened, my heart tightened. I knew she would come. And when she did, she inspected everything, my dress, my posture, my smile. "White suits you," she said, touching the fabric without permission. "It hides flaws." I nodded. I always nodded. Survival had taught me that silence was sometimes safer than truth. As guests began arriving, I caught sight of her through the window, seated in the front row, elegant and composed in emerald green. She looked proud, not of me, but of the role she believed she still owned in her son's life. The ceremony passed in a blur of vows and trembling hands. When my husband said "I do," his eyes shone with love. I believed him. I still do. But love does not make a man see what he has never been taught to look for. At the reception, the lights softened, music swelled, and champagne flowed freely. Laughter filled the hall. Everyone said it was perfect. That's when I felt it, that familiar prickle at the back of my neck. Instinct. I turned and saw her standing near the table where my glass rested. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the glass. Her movements were small. Careful. The way someone moves when they don't want to be noticed. Her body blocked the view of others as her hand dipped briefly toward my drink. My smile stayed in place, but my blood turned cold. I remembered every warning I had ignored. Every "you're too sensitive." Every moment I told myself love meant patience. I didn't know yet what she had done. But I knew, without doubt, that this was no accident. And in that moment, standing in my wedding dress with a room full of witnesses and no one truly watching, I understood something clearly for the first time. This wedding was not the beginning of my submission. It was the beginning of my awakening. For a moment after I saw her hand leave my glass, I couldn't move. The music continued, laughter rippled across the room, and waiters drifted between tables as if nothing in the world had shifted. But inside me, something had cracked open, wide, sharp, and irreversible. I stared at the glass. Pale gold. Innocent. Dangerous. My heart began to race, not with panic, but with clarity. Fear would have been easier. Fear freezes you. This didn't. This sharpened me. I thought of every small humiliation I had swallowed over the years. The way she corrected me in front of relatives. The way she reminded me that I was replaceable, that her son's life belonged to her long before it belonged to me. I had always believed she wanted to control me. I hadn't believed she would harm me. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed my dress, forcing my breathing to slow. I reminded myself that this was my wedding. There were people everywhere. Cameras. Witnesses. I wasn't alone, even if I felt like it. I stepped closer to the table, pretending to adjust the flowers. My mother-in-law had already turned away, greeting guests with that flawless smile that fooled everyone except the woman it was meant to break. I lifted my glass halfway, hesitated, then lowered it again. What if I was wrong? The thought flickered briefly, then died. I knew her too well. She never acted without intention. And intention always came wrapped in politeness. I glanced across the room. My husband was laughing with friends, relaxed, unaware that something fragile had just shattered. I didn't want to ruin him with fear, not yet. Not until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. So I did the only thing I could. I switched the glasses. It was quick. Quiet. Almost elegant. My fingers brushed the stem of her glass as if by accident, and in one smooth motion I exchanged them. The cold of the glass sent a chill up my arm, but my face remained calm. I remember thinking how strange it was that revenge didn't feel loud. It felt precise. I stepped back, my heart pounding now, not from fear but from the weight of what I had just done. If I was wrong, I would carry the guilt forever. If I was right, the truth would surface on its own. Minutes passed like hours. She moved through the room, basking in attention, playing the role of the proud mother. I watched her the way one watches a storm forming at sea, beautiful, distant, inevitable. A small part of me wanted to scream, to expose her immediately. But another part, stronger and older, whispered, "Wait. Let the truth speak for itself." When she tapped her spoon against the glass to call for attention, the room hushed. She raised the glass, my glass, and smiled in my direction. For a heartbeat, our eyes met. There was something in her expression then. Satisfaction. Anticipation. I returned her smile. Not the polite one. Not the obedient one. The real one. Inside, I whispered a promise to myself, no matter what happens next, I will not be silent again. As she lifted the glass to her lips, the room holding its breath, I felt oddly calm. The decision had already been made. And there was no turning back. The room fell silent as my mother-in-law cleared her throat, the spoon still resting against the rim of the glass. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her, waiting for wisdom, for blessing, for something warm and maternal. She loved moments like this, moments where she could stand tall and be seen as the center of gravity in my husband's life. She began to speak. "My son," she said, her voice smooth, practiced, "has always been my greatest pride." I watched her lips move, watched the glass rise slightly in her hand. My heart beat steadily now, not wildly as I had expected. It was as if my fear had already burned itself out, leaving only resolve behind. She spoke about family. About loyalty. About sacrifice. Words she had never truly lived by, at least not with me. Each sentence landed heavier than the last, coated in irony so thick it almost tasted bitter in my mouth. Then she raised the glass higher. "To new beginnings," she said, finally turning toward me, her smile tight and knowing. "And to a bride who understands her place." A few people laughed softly, unsure. My husband frowned slightly, confused, but said nothing. I met her gaze and inclined my head, my face serene. She drank. At first, nothing happened. The room exhaled. For a terrifying second, doubt clawed at my chest. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I imagined it. My fingers curled into the fabric of my dress, gripping it like an anchor. Then her voice faltered. She lowered the glass, blinking rapidly. Her hand trembled, spilling a few drops onto the tablecloth. The color drained from her face as she reached for the chair beside her. "Are you all right?" someone asked. She opened her mouth to answer, but her words came out tangled, heavy. She swayed slightly, knocking into the table. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Panic rippled through the room. Guests stood. Chairs scraped. My husband rushed forward, calling her name. I stayed where I was, my pulse loud in my ears, my eyes never leaving her. She clutched her chest, breathing unevenly, her perfect composure cracking in front of everyone she had ever impressed. The mask was slipping. I don't feel well," she slurred. A doctor in the crowd pushed through, kneeling beside her. Questions were asked. Water was offered. Someone called for security. That was when I stepped forward. My voice surprised even me, steady, clear, impossible to ignore. "That glass," I said softly. "That was meant for me." Every head turned. I felt the weight of the room press against my shoulders, but I didn't shrink. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. "I saw her put something into my drink," I continued. "So I switched our glasses." The silence that followed was deafening. My husband stared at me, shock written across his face. Then he looked at his mother, really looked at her, and something broke in his eyes. Security staff moved quickly. A waiter confirmed what I said, his voice trembling as he explained what he had seen. Someone mentioned cameras. Evidence. My mother-in-law tried to speak, to deny it, but the truth had already spilled out, louder than her lies ever could. As she was taken away for medical care, her eyes met mine one last time. There was no anger there. Only the realization that her control had ended. And that the truth, once tasted, could never be swallowed back down. The wedding hall never truly recovered from what happened next. The music stopped. Conversations dropped into hushed fragments. People avoided my eyes, unsure whether to look at me with pity or awe. I stood in the center of it all, still wearing my white dress, feeling as though I had just stepped out of a storm that had been building my entire life. My mother-in-law was taken away by paramedics, her emerald dress swallowed by flashing lights and murmurs. The woman who had ruled family dinners with a raised eyebrow and a quiet insult was suddenly powerless, exposed not by rage, but by her own intentions. My husband found me near the edge of the room, his face pale, his hands shaking. "I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "I swear to you, I didn't know." I looked at him carefully. This was the moment that mattered more than the wedding, more than the guests, more than the scandal. This was the moment that would define the rest of my life. "I know," I said quietly. "But now you do." Tears filled his eyes. He apologized again and again, not just for what his mother had done, but for every time he hadn't listened closely enough, hadn't seen how small her words had made me feel. For the first time, he wasn't defending her. He was standing beside me. And that mattered. We didn't end the reception. Instead, we chose to reclaim it. The lights came back on. Music returned, softer, steadier. People slowly relaxed, realizing they were witnessing not a tragedy, but a turning point. I lifted a fresh glass of champagne, untouched, and took a small sip. It tasted clean. Safe. Mine. Later that night, after the guests left and the hall fell quiet, I stood alone for a moment, barefoot on the marble floor, holding my shoes in my hand. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who nodded, who endured, who believed kindness meant endurance without limits. I wasn't her anymore. The next morning, the truth had already spread through the family. Some tried to minimize it. Some tried to excuse it. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. Boundaries were set. Distance was created. Consequences unfolded naturally, without me lifting a finger. The sweetest revenge wasn't punishment, it was freedom. My marriage began that day not in blind hope, but in honesty. My husband learned that loving me meant protecting me, even when it was uncomfortable. And I learned that loving myself meant never again swallowing silence like poison. I didn't ruin my wedding. I saved my life. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a woman can do is smile, not because she is obedient or afraid, but because she knows the truth, trusts her instincts, and chooses herself. And that is how I walked away from my wedding, not as a victim of betrayal, but as a woman who finally claimed her power.